Welcome to the Global Pulse, a short video series where our experts break down a trending topic in international business and why it matters to you.
With the recent U.S. action in Venezuela, removing the president and taking over the oil industry, at least theoretically, and maybe practically as well, the United States is hoping to accomplish a couple of things. One is political. I guess the U.S. had an issue with the former president of Venezuela, but also economically, the U.S. wants to gain control of the Venezuelan oil in order to, as the president said, to drive down the price of oil. My understanding is that he would like to see the price of oil fall to less than $50 a barrel. And so the question is, what are the implications of the takeover of the Venezuelan oil by the U.S. government? I understand that the Venezuelan oil is a very thick, heavy crude, and that it can only be refined in certain refineries, and that some of these refineries exist on the U.S. Gulf Coast. And so, what I gather is that more oil is going to be diverted to these U.S. Gulf Coast refineries, and that oil is going to be refined into gasoline, petroleum, and other products, some of which will be used for U.S. domestic consumption, and some of which will probably be exported to other countries. This oil previously was being sort of sent to places like Cuba and China, and so those countries will experience sort of less oil shipments from Venezuela. Probably for China, it won't make much difference because the Venezuelan oil only accounted for a very small percentage of their oil consumption. But for Cuba, it could make a fairly large difference because that was a substantial percentage of their oil consumption. As far as the U.S. goes, I think that perhaps in the short run, there could be a slight depression in the prices. My understanding is that this crude oil is very similar to the crude oil that we get from Canada, and that it may displace some of the Canadian crude oil, although that crude oil tends not to be refined at these Gulf refineries, but at refineries in the Midwest. And so it could add to the supply of oil in the United States and maybe depress prices. As far as sort of long run implications, as been reported fairly widely in the news, there's a reluctance by some of these large oil companies to make substantial investments in Venezuela because of the uncertainties involved with investing in that country. The fact that assets have been nationalized on a couple of occasions in the past, and so given the uncertainty and also the pretty decrepit condition of their current infrastructure, it would take many billions of dollars to substantially increase the production of crude oil in Venezuela to the sort of former levels. So probably we're not going to see a sort of large increase in supply, at least in the short run, and maybe not for quite a while. There's one other sort of important consideration, and that's Saudi Arabia's role as being a sort of a swing generator of oil. The Saudis have target prices that they would like to see oil at, and so they're able to keep prices at that target by decreasing their own production. And so if they see that supply of oil, because of this sort of redirection of oil from Venezuela, is causing the oil prices to fall, they may very likely cut production of their own oil so that supply and demand become balanced. Finally, the largest oil producer in the world is the United States, and much of this oil is produced by frackers. My understanding that if the price of oil gets to $50, fracking is no longer economically feasible. And so what we could see is that the Venezuelan oil could very well replace American oil, and that would again bring demand and supply in balance. So the short run, maybe a slight depression in the price of oil because of all this extra oil that is being diverted from China and other places to Cuba to the United States. But in the uh, sort of longer, medium to longer run, this may probably balance out again as the supplies of oil from other places like Saudi Arabia and the United States go down. In the longer run, because of the huge amounts of investment required to build up the infrastructure in Venezuela, we may not see any increase in oil production, substantial increase in oil production from that country for quite some time.